Over the years, I have somewhat surprisingly come to love the horror genre. I think one of the big reasons why is that it allows for a sense of really grounded realism, but also invites the use of fantasy into its narrative storytelling redundancy. um, the cool thing about horror is how much you can use allegory and symbolism to bring to life these monstrous personal problems and challenges that we face. A bit of anxiety in a horror film manifests itself as a supernatural serial killer, for example, that can't be killed. Well, there are lots of things like this. Maybe it's a haunted hotel. Maybe it's a being that just kind of smiles at you. I haven't seen that movie. I've read the synopsis. It sounds pretty creepy. Or something that continually follows you so that you cannot feel safe anywhere. Some of my favorite horror stories are ones that really delve into this sort of thing. The Shining is a yearly watch for me because I fucking love that movie and how it manages to be a kind of goofy haunted house movie, but also a cerebral deep dive into what happens when you leave crazy people alone in a hotel all winter. That's a fun thing to think about. I also love something like Silent Hill 2, where every facet of the horror is directly correlated to a part of its main character, preying on their worst fears and trying to make fear from their own psyche. Silent Hill 2 is a really interesting example because it's now often imitated, but I think the original kind of did it best. It's a special kind of horror brought about by taking this one character and making all of their fears and anxieties not only manifest, but interlock together in a way that makes a scary amount of sense. And the amount of sense that Silent Hill 2 makes based on what its character fears is one of the scariest parts about it. Like, yeah, all these weird leggy nurses and shit might seem really creepy even by themselves, but when you weave their narrative together with what we find out about James Sunderland, not only does the story become scary, it becomes psychologically stressful because now we are living this man's worst nightmare over and over again in a way that represents how it's festered in his soul since it happened. Silent Hill 2 is like a really great game and a really great representation of this in a way that future Silent Hills kind of struggle with. I think Silent Hill 3 kind of does a good job and kind of does the same thing while getting a little bit muddled with what they wanted to do in the first game. But, and a lot of horror has tried this since. Even my own Resident Evil has attempted this sort of horror to great effect. House Beneviento in Resident Evil Village is a really good example of that Silent Hill 2 sort of like everything is preying directly on the fears and anxieties that you have in your mind, Ethan Winters, sort of storytelling that I think is really effective. It being so close to Halloween, or perhaps Halloween when this video goes up, I haven't decided yet. I wanted to do one of these kinds of vlogs where I pitch a thing, and hopefully y'all can tell me about it in the comments. My question today is, what would your Silent Hill 2 look like? Now, this is a big question. I know. I'm asking you to design an entire freaking game. But I think in some ways, it's an interesting exercise in thinking about ourselves. I think it is an interesting way to recontextualize our fears and anxieties, or maybe the things we think our fears and anxieties are. I've thought about this for about 10 minutes, so unlike how I usually roll, I'm not going to give my full analysis here, but I wanted to kind of shoot off the cuff and talk a little bit about what I think my Silent Hill 2 would look like. I think even in the game itself, it's described that Silent Hill appears differently to each of the characters based on their personality. So I think it's kind of interesting to explore what everyone's personal hell would be like. Um, I'm putting this sort of in the context of Silent Hill 2 because that's the one that does this the best. Even something like The Shining doesn't really handle that part of it. Like, it doesn't necessarily cater it to the fears of the Torrances. It's just that the Overlook is an evil fucking hotel, and that's scary. Like, I love The Shining. Not necessarily the best for this thing. And man, I tell you, I would love to make some video essays and vlogs about The Shining and Doctor Sleep, because man, I do love me some of them. So yeah, what does my Silent Hill 2 look like? Well, one of the first things I think about is sort of like, what does the environment look like? In the original Silent Hill 2, the town is run down, dreary, covered in fog, which I think is always a thing in Silent Hill. But it looks like the inside of James Sunderland's soul. He is run down, he's beatered, that's a good word. He's racked with guilt. Of course, a town that is a reflection of his psyche will look run down, depressing, and frightening. I don't know if mine would look quite like that. I don't think I'm quite as down bad as James Sunderland. I think my Silent Hill would look a little bit more normal. I think it would look a little more functional, but I think a lot of things would just be kind of broken. Some buildings would not have power. Some buildings would not have water. Some buildings would have big issues that would be left alone to kind of to rot. A lot of places would still be functional and livable as long as you don't go into certain areas, which for a video game would work out just fine. There would be like a really normal building, and then there would just be this one area that's like boarded up all over the place. I think that if it were a game, you would see those kinds of places a lot, and then suddenly towards the middle or last third of the game would ask you to break down one of these barriers and go into one of the rooms that you're not supposed to. As things get worse and worse, you would need something in there, so you can't avoid it anymore. And I think a lot of what my struggle would be that I like to avoid problems. I like to work around issues without complaining or without really even acknowledging them sometimes. I like to take the simplest possible path and the least scary path. So I think that would be something that would be available to a player of my Silent Hill. You can take the least scary path, and there's actually a very short and somewhat dissatisfying way through the game. A lot of those attempts will end in failure, but if you play the coward's way each time, you can in fact finish the game. It will be very unsatisfying. Let me tell you. But if you think the way that I do, or by extension the character that would star in this game, then you can get out. There's no problems with that. That is one of the endings. But if you are going for a better ending, one that brings me face to face with my own fears, then yeah, at some point you're going to have to go into one of these places that don't, that you're not supposed to go into. And I think in those places would be like a lot of weird fear and a lot of, I think they would connect to other places that are damaged and patched up and just kind of mulled over. The entirety of my Silent Hill being this weird house of cards that's held together with toothpicks and duct tape. Not duct tape, Scotch tape. Duct tape is too powerful. I think that's a lot what my Silent Hill would be like. It's this thing where it could all collapse in a moment, and if it does, then it becomes scary. It becomes an absolutely panic-inducing place that, if there's nothing to hold a particularly weak part of it up, then it just collapses. And really the only thing you can do is get the hell out of there. the thing being is that maybe like in each of those places that could collapse, there's something you need, right? In order to get the best ending, you need to be able to press forward through that and get the thing you need in order to actually like progress the game and get the best ending. Um, I think there would also be a very strange cast of characters. I feel like in Silent Hill 2, there's like this cast of like friendly characters who are all kind of goofy and and in some cases hostile. I think we would have something similar to that in my Silent Hill. But I don't know that the people would necessarily have faces, or you would never really look directly at them. Um, I think that maybe they would like disappear mid conversation or leave abruptly. Um, they would be presented in a way that you can never really understand them. Or there would be like branching dialogue options, and none of them would be right because that's how I feel about my own social interactions sometimes. Um, so I don't know. I feel like that's partially how that would work. Um, I think the crippling fear of loneliness, the idea that I'm keeping everything together as best I can in this really weird, fragile state where I'm ignoring the larger problems, that's really what forms the basis of my Silent Hill. And I think that there's a lot of ways you can really uh, represent that. So I feel, I feel super. I feel like maybe that doesn't sound scary, but I think it could. Obviously, you'd have to translate some of these things into the more grotesque things, but I think my Silent Hill would be a little bit more of a cerebral thing because, again, I'm not in the same mental place as, James Sunderland, so I don't know that the monsters would be as scary. I think my version would be more about like paranoia and sort of the fear that everyone secretly hates you. I think that there would maybe be like bizarro versions of the friendly characters who sometimes chase you through areas of Silent Hill only for you to figure out that they're diverting you away from somewhere you're not supposed to go, and that they're not actually this version of the person. You run into someone later and you're like, dude, you chased me with a chainsaw, and they're like, no, I absolutely did not. Like, because I don't know, I feel like I've had social interactions like that where it's like, you know I feel like I've made someone hate me and they really don't feel that way at all. Um, and that's something that I fear and that I live with and that I struggle with and causes me anxiety because I don't really know um, if I've done right or wrong by them. Um, and that's scary. Um, so I don't know that necessarily mine would be about like these grotesque horrors. I think obviously this is Silent Hill, so they would be present. I think it would just be a world slightly distorted, almost like a plasticky Pleasantville sort of existence where it's like it's not necessarily that it's scary and grotesque. It's just uncanny. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I feel about it. You know. Here's all of these things that are sort of unfinished and unrealized and given up on and uncommitted to, um, and sort of all these weird imperfections that people can notice and will probably stop to notice, and it just gives you this sort of unsettling atmosphere of like, man, this guy does not finish anything, does he? And this guy will do anything to just kind of keep it going, um, however he can get to the finish line. You know, I really think that's kind of what mine would look like a little bit. I think it's a fun concept. I think there's so much more that I could do with it. Um, but for being off the cuff, that's kind of where I'm at. And I wanted to give a good example of what I'm sort of asking you to do, or asking you to think about. Um, so yeah. What do you think your Silent Hill would look like if it were your version of Silent Hill 2? what would make it scary for other people, including you? How would you try to portray your fears and anxieties? Now, this could be a visceral fear like, man, spiders suck, or snakes, or clowns, or ghosts, or whatever you're afraid of. Obviously, I think that would show up somewhere in your Silent Hill 2. But also, like, how would your anxieties manifest as a physical horror? How would they affect the world? What would your world look like? Are you happy? And could we take that happiness away and make you fearful? I think no matter how, like, zen you are in life, or how, happy, truly happy you are, or at peace you are, I think that there's always a way to make someone feel fear. I think that when you are happy, even, like, you have to have some innate fear of losing that happiness, right? Like, because that is always possible. And some people, like, nothing can deter them, but I don't necessarily feel like I feel like that's rare, and I feel like there's always a specific set of ways to and this is why we don't go over on vlogs. There's always a specific set of ways to do that. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below what you think your Silent Hill 2 would be like, and we'll maybe reconvene about this someday. Happy Halloween.